My first day at the city's oldest radio station is something I will never forget. I was excited, but also a little nervous. The station was located in a building dating back to the 1950s. From the outside, it looked ordinary, but stepping inside, the creaking of the old wooden floors and the heavy clanging doors immediately caught my attention. Everything inside felt antique yet majestic, with a classic charm. The library, filled with dusty records, books, and yellowed newspapers, gave off a strange, mysterious aura. The soft light flickering between the shelves made it feel like I had stepped into another world. As I approached the microphone for the first time, everything seemed normal. But the moment I turned on the audio system, I heard a faint rustling and the low sound of someone laughing. I dismissed it at first as my imagination because the building was old and the creaking of the floors was constant. However, when I glanced around, I noticed the lights dimming and brightening on their own. Every moment sent a shiver down my spine, and I tried to steady my racing heartbeat. Throughout the day, I explored different rooms and offices of the station. In each room, there was an unusual feeling, an almost imperceptible energy. The old microphones, the crackling speakers, and the far corners where shadows seemed thicker hinted that this station was far from ordinary. In the dimly lit old studio, I felt the presence of something unseen. For a brief moment, it seemed like someone was standing behind me, but when I turned, there was nothing. By the end of the day, I tried convincing myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks, but the unsettling sensation lingered. Little did I know, this first day was only the beginning of a series of the most bizarre and terrifying experiences I would ever encounter. That day taught me that in this station, normalcy is an illusion, and every corner holds its own hidden story. My first live show at the station started at 8 in the evening. I was nervous because it was my first time sitting in front of a live microphone. The station felt old and mysterious, but I tried to push my fear aside and focus on my work. As soon as I turned on the mic, everything seemed normal. Then suddenly, an old song started playing from the station's vintage records, a song that wasn't in the station's playlist and one I had never heard before. The melody was eerie, unfamiliar, almost otherworldly, and beneath it, a faint, unsettling rustle could be heard. At first, I assumed it was just a record starting automatically. But then I realized that in between the song, a voice was speaking my name. The voice was human-like, yet hollow and chilling enough to make the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. My fingers froze on the microphone, and my heartbeat accelerated. I tried to keep the show going, but the voice continued repeating, "Why are you here?" I didn't answer, too scared to move or speak. Meanwhile, the lights in the studio began flickering, dimming, and brightening in strange patterns. Occasionally, the dim light formed shapes that resembled a human figure. The vintage equipment, the speakers, the record players, seemed to react to my presence, moving subtly on their own. I tried to convince myself that it was fatigue or nerves, but deep down, I knew this was no ordinary night. Throughout the broadcast, I kept glancing around the room, feeling a constant, invisible pressure as if someone, or something, was watching my every move. Every second felt like a test of courage, and I realized that the station was far from just a building. It was alive in a way I could barely comprehend. By the time the broadcast ended, my pulse was racing, yet a strange thrill ran through me. I understood that the station was filled with unseen entities, watching, listening, and waiting. That night was a warning. The events of my first broadcast were only the beginning of X. At around 2 in the morning, the station was silent except for the soft hum of the old equipment. I decided to explore the station's oldest room, the library, because something about it felt off. The library was filled with hundreds of old records, books, and yellowed newspaper clippings, all thick with dust. As I stepped inside, the door suddenly slammed shut behind me. I pushed with all my strength, but it didn't budge. Inside, the dim light flickered across the shelves, and I noticed a faint, hazy figure moving among the stacks. The figure was humanoid but blurry and undefined, like a shadow given form. I instinctively took a step back, but it felt as though the figure was waiting, almost observing my every movement. My heart raced as I tried to calm myself, knowing that any sudden motion might trigger a response. Suddenly, a low voice echoed through the room. "Why have you come here?" I didn't answer. Deep down, I knew that responding could provoke something I wasn't ready to face. Objects around me, old records, chairs, and papers, began to shift slightly, as though reacting to my presence. The sensation was terrifying. The room itself seemed alive, aware of me. I turned on my flashlight, hoping the light would reveal the figure, but it only temporarily dissipated it. The moment the light faded, the shadow returned, closer this time. Every instinct in me screamed to leave, but the door wouldn't open. I realized then that the station was not merely a building. It was a living entity, with each room guarding secrets and histories long forgotten. By the end of that terrifying night, I understood that the library, and perhaps the station itself, was sentient in some way. Every floorboard, every shelf, every dusty record held echoes of past inhabitants. And that night, I had unknowingly become part of its story, a small piece of its ongoing mystery that refused to be understood. A few nights later, the station phones began ringing at odd hours. At first, I assumed it was just leftover recordings or technical glitches, but it quickly became clear that something was far from normal. The voices on the other end were not human. Sometimes they laughed, sometimes they screamed, and often all I could hear were faint, ragged breaths. Each call felt as though someone, or something, was monitoring my every move, studying me in real time. Determined to understand, I started recording the calls. Listening back, I was horrified. The voice whispered my name repeatedly. "You will not be released, not yet." I set the phone down and looked around the room, but it was empty. The sound was coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was relentless, and no matter how hard I tried to block it out, the voice persisted. The calls didn't follow a schedule. Sometimes they came at 2 in the morning, sometimes at 3. Once, I even woke mid-dream to hear a faint whisper echoing from the receiver. I asked the other staff if they had received any strange calls, but none of them had. It was always me. Somehow, the station had singled me out. Night after night, the calls continued. Some sounded like laughter, others like a child giggling, and occasionally a low moan would pierce the darkness. I realized that this wasn't just a test of nerves. It was a psychological game, designed to break me down slowly. Each call intensified my fear, embedding the station's presence deeper into my consciousness. By the end, I understood one thing. The station wasn't just haunted, it was alive in a way that transcended the physical. The voices were a reminder that this place had memory, intent, and a will of its own. And I had become part of that will. The calls would continue, haunting every hour I spent alone in the building, each ring a chilling reminder that the station's eyes were always watching, always listening. One day, while exploring the oldest studio, I stumbled upon a dusty, yellowed tape labeled with faded handwriting. My curiosity overpowered my caution, and I decided to play it. As soon as the tape started, a voice emerged from the speaker. At first ordinary, but then it began to mimic my current live show almost perfectly, predicting my every word before I even spoke it. The voice was soft yet commanding, eerie yet oddly familiar. It said things like, "You're saying that now, but you'll realize soon." Every sentence was synchronized with my heartbeat, and I felt chills run down my spine. I immediately stopped the tape, my hands trembling. But even after I left the studio, the faint echoes of that voice seemed to follow me, whispering, repeating, and taunting me. I couldn't explain it. The tape wasn't just a recording. It was alive in some way, connected to the very essence of the station. Every note, every pause, every inflection carried a hidden meaning, as if someone from the past had recorded my future. I realized that the station's old equipment, the mics, the speakers, even the cables, were all channels for something beyond normal understanding. The rest of the night, I tried to collect myself, but the whispers from the tape lingered in my mind. I replayed the memory of the voice again and again, noticing details I had missed, subtle changes in tone, faint background noises that hinted at shadows moving just out of sight. It became clear to me that the tape wasn't just history. It was a living record of the station's consciousness, an archive of everything that had happened and everything yet to come. By the morning, I understood the terrifying reality. The station was not only haunted but sentient. Every recording, every old tape, every microphone was infused with its presence. The tape had marked me, and I had become part of its ongoing story, a story I was only beginning to comprehend. One night, While preparing my script in front of the microphone, I felt an overwhelming sense that I wasn't alone. The studio was quiet, yet the air felt heavy, as if something unseen was standing right behind me. I slowly raised my eyes toward the dark reflection in the studio glass, and that's when I saw it. A tall, black shadow stood directly behind the mic. It had a human shape, but no face, no eyes, only a deep, unnatural darkness. My breath caught in my throat. The moment I turned around, the shadow vanished. But the fear remained. Almost instantly, the station reacted. Papers lifted from the desk as if caught in a sudden wind. The old chairs creaked and slid on their own. The speakers crackled violently, spilling distorted static into the room. It felt as though the entire station was responding to whatever had just appeared. I tried to continue working, convincing myself it was stress or exhaustion. But every time I leaned closer to the mic, I felt something hovering just inches away from my back. The shadow reappeared again and again, sometimes in reflections, sometimes in the corners of my vision. It never spoke, yet its silence felt threatening, as if it was studying me, measuring my fear. The equipment seemed to obey it. When I spoke, my voice echoed unnaturally. When I stopped, the static screamed louder, almost in protest. I realized then that the shadow was not separate from the station. It was part of it. A guardian, or perhaps a prisoner, bound to the microphone and the broadcasts. By the end of the night, I understood something terrifying. The shadow wasn't trying to scare me away. It was waiting for me to accept it. The station had chosen me, and the shadow was proof that I was no longer just an employee. I was becoming part of its living, breathing nightmare. During the final hour of my shift, I turned on the microphone, expecting another quiet broadcast. Instead, the moment I spoke, voices flooded the studio. They didn't come from the speakers alone. They came from the walls, the ceiling, the floor. Some whispered my name. Others repeated my words in twisted, mocking tones. Among them were sounds that made my blood run cold. Distant sobbing, sharp gasps for air, and the soft laughter of a child. I scanned the room in panic, but I was completely alone. Still, the voices surrounded me, circling like predators. I tried shutting down the equipment, but the sounds continued, growing clearer and closer. Each voice felt deliberate, intelligent. They weren't random noises, they were communicating. Some begged me to stay. Others warned me to leave while I still could. One voice, deeper than the rest, spoke calmly and clearly. You hear us now because you belong here. As the voices overlapped, I felt pressure building inside my head, as if my thoughts were being pulled apart. Memories that weren't mine began to surface, fragments of past broadcasts, forgotten screams, final words spoken by people who had once worked here. The station was playing them through me. I realized the horrifying truth. The station wasn't broadcasting sound, it was broadcasting souls. Every voice belonged to someone who had never truly left. And now, the station had opened itself to me, allowing me to hear everything it had ever consumed. When the voices finally faded, the silence felt worse than the noise. I sat frozen, knowing this was no longer about curiosity or fear. I had crossed a line. The station had let me listen, and once you hear the voices of the dead, they never truly stop speaking. One evening, while examining the station's old floor plans, I discovered a hidden room that wasn't on the current layout. Curiosity gripped me. I had to find out what was inside. That night, I followed a narrow, forgotten hallway toward the concealed space. The air grew colder with every step, and a thin fog seemed to rise from the floor. Shadows flickered along the walls, twisting unnaturally as I moved closer. As I entered the room, I saw it immediately, an old radio sitting in the center, powered on, playing soft static. It wasn't plugged into anything. The voice that came from it was faint at first, then unmistakably clear. Come closer. I'll show you everything. My heartbeat raced, and I stepped back, but an irresistible curiosity pushed me forward. Listening closer, the radio whispered things that seemed tailored to me, phrases that predicted my actions, repeated my thoughts, and even mocked my fear. Occasionally, the voice would morph, laughing softly, crying softly, then falling silent, only to resume as if aware of my reactions. The entire room seemed alive with presence. The walls, the floorboards, even the furniture, every object felt like it was watching. I realized then that this hidden room was the station's heart. It held the core of its sentience, the secrets of every inhabitant, past and present. Each whisper and shadow seemed to carry the weight of decades, of stories left unfinished and voices trapped in time. By the time I left the hidden room, I understood a chilling truth. This station was not merely haunted, it was alive. And I was now a part of its consciousness. Every corner, every object, every sound in this station was a thread in a web that I had stepped into, and there was no way out without becoming part of its story. The final live broadcast was approaching, and I resolved to capture everything, to let the listeners witness the reality of the station. The moment I turned on the microphone, every light in the studio died. Only the faint glow of the radio dial remained, casting ghostly shadows. The familiar hum of electronics was replaced by whispers and rustling, filling every corner of the station. As I spoke, my voice echoed not just through the mic, but through every room, every hall, as if the station itself had absorbed it. And then it appeared, the shadow, closer than ever before. Its dark form loomed over me, observing, almost smiling. My pulse quickened. Every move I made seemed anticipated. The static and interference from the speakers repeated my own words in strange, distorted ways. I tried to maintain composure, focusing on my narration, but I realized the station had become more than a building. It was a living entity, and I had become an actor in its story. Every note, every sound, every shadow was part of its consciousness, reacting, observing, judging. The broadcast continued, and the voices returned, overlapping with my own. Laughter, crying, whispers, echoes of the long-departed inhabitants. I finally understood. This was not a performance for listeners. It was a ritual. The station demanded witnesses, and I was trapped in the middle, part of its eternal broadcast. Even after the lights flickered back on, the atmosphere remained charged with its presence. The shadow disappeared, but the whispers persisted, now embedded in every corner of the station. My last live show wasn't an ending, it was an initiation. I had become one with the station's haunting legacy, part of the living history that would repeat for anyone who came after me. Tried to leave the station that night, but the doors wouldn't budge. It was as if the walls themselves had grown alive, resisting my every attempt. I checked every hallway, every studio, but the station was inescapable. The presence was palpable, pressing against me, whispering through the walls, speaking without words. I realized then that this station was not a building. It was a sentient entity, filled with memories of the past, echoes of voices long gone, and shadows that never left. Every microphone, every speaker, every dusty record was imbued with life, and now I was part of it. The whispers from the past greeted me, acknowledged me, tested me. Eventually, I returned to the oldest room, the radio still running, the whispers ceaseless. The station had fully accepted me as part of its story. It wasn't trying to scare me. It was integrating me into its consciousness. From that moment, I knew there would be no leaving. Every visitor, every employee, every curious soul who dared enter would hear the same voices, see the same shadows, and feel the same presence. The lights flickered on again, but the station was not the same. It lived, it breathed, and it remembered everything. The haunting continues. Every night, the whispers resume, the shadows return, and the cycle begins anew. Anyone stepping inside will be drawn into its story, just as I was. The station is alive, eternal, and patient. And now, it waits for the next soul to hear the voices and never forget.